Men podcast. Today we're speaking with Bret Packard all the way from Las Vegas. And Bret is the CEO of the Packard Network. Hello, Bret. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Packard Network?
Sure, it's great to be here. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me on, and it's an honor and a privilege to be able to speak with you and your audience. So it's great. So so basically, the Packard Network is, I worked 30 years in corporate life across 3 banks. One of them was an Australian bank, and then a British bank and an American bank. And I basically covered 30 countries over those 3 decades. Spent most of my time in Asia Pacific, and a bit of time in Europe, a few years in the Middle East and Africa as well. And so what the Packard Network is it's my way of taking a lot of the concepts that I learned over those 30 years that I feel would be applicable in today's world. So, for example, on my morning post that I do on LinkedIn,
yes, I
cover every morning something from journals. I kept a total of 89 journals over those 30 years, kind of recording daily concepts and learning. So it's just a wealth of knowledge on a whole array of things that I learned over the years that I'm hoping to transfer the knowledge to other people across multi-generations. The Packard Network's mission is basically to grow leaders that grow other leaders across multiple generations. So, for example, very soon the biggest part of the workforce globally will be Generation Z people as well. But the question is, the people that are managing Gen Z, do they really know how to properly lead that generation? And do they know how to properly lead millennials, the prior generation, and even themselves? So I think that there's a lot of challenges out there. So my mission is to basically help to develop those leaders and cultivate the right type of culture sustainably around the world.
That's amazing, because it certainly is needed. So if you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn. And if you are on LinkedIn, make sure you look up Bret Packard, because he puts out inspirational and insightful posts continuously. Every day there's something to learn from your posts, and you get a lot of interaction because people are listening and learning from what you've got to say. So if you're on LinkedIn, make sure you look up Bret Packard. Now, before we get going, I just want to make sure everyone understands this is a men's podcast, Thrive for Men. So anything we say never takes away or negates from anything that women are going through. It's just that we're specifically talking about men. So in Australia, the stats are 9 people a day are harming themselves, suicide, and 7 of those are men. So they're very, very high stats, and it's something that we need to change. Within leadership and the corporate world, we know that there's a lot of pressures and a lot of different influences, and especially if you don't have the right team around you, and if you don't have the right leader, that can really cause problems. What would you say about what's your recommendation for inviting discussion in the workplace and mental health in the workplace? How do we look after our people?
I think it's a great question, and it's especially relevant today, right? I know the issue that you've spoken about has been prevalent for a while, right? But maybe the causes of it have changed over time, and so I guess the first thing is culture, right? Really, how do people? We're talking about men today, so we'll just, how do men feel in today's culture? Well, there's a lot of, the majority of leaders are men, right? And I think there's some effort underway to change and diversify that, which I'm fully supportive of that. But back to your topic, a lot of culture in many parts is really how people are able to either flourish, prosper, or or the opposite of that. And I guess the worst possible case could be suicide, right? Where people just feel that there's no other option when actually there is. So mental health is crucial, and culture, I view it as kind of the dial along those two extremities of flourishing versus the unfortunate and preventable instant of suicide that you mentioned. So what does that really mean specifically from a leadership perspective? Well, it's the ecosystem that is around the particular person or group of people. So let's pick one topic: pressure. Let's say sales pressure. Somebody's in a growth position, and they have a big, what I'll call a target. I don't really like to use the word target a lot, but a lot of companies do, unfortunately, and that can create pressure. So humans in general, under a lot of pressure, the majority of humans do not respond really well to pressure. There are people in sport that you've got your money players that perform incredibly well under pressure, but it's not everybody. It's usually the few, really highly paid, skilled performers that have learned to kind of block out the stadium of 100,000 fans, and they perform when the heat is on. But the majority of people do not. So applying more pressure to people can actually create a whole range of behaviors that are not intentional. For example, bad behavior, meaning in order to meet my target and feed my family, maybe I can take some shortcuts here, and maybe I can, maybe some people may not put the customer first, and they might put their target before the customer. So that would not bode very well, for a good outcome for anybody. But it will always come back to the person that is feeling the pressure. So in many ways, Nant, I believe that a lot of the cultural improvements that need to be taken today can be to actually relieve pressure from people, right? We're in the pandemic era. Yeah. We've been under lockdown, open up, lockdown, open up. Australia's been through a lot of that as well, depending on where you're at in Australia. So same thing has happened in America. And a lot of people have been kind of jerked back and forth into, and I'll talk about Hong Kong as well. Yeah. There's a lot of men in Hong Kong and women in Hong Kong that have more space at the office than they do in their apartment. So if you think about a condition where people are on lockdown, then all of a sudden they feel like they're kind of living 24/7 inside of a box, right? And that creates pressure. So I talked about sales target pressure. This is a different kind of pressure coming from the pandemic. So any of those pressures, what needs to be done is that these pressures need to be released and lifted. And somewhere in the past decade before the pandemic, I have the view that the Great Resignation and all this stuff that we're hearing about that creates this pressure, there was a disconnect already starting to form between the ownership of companies and the people that do the work, the employees, which is who you and I are talking about today. So and then the pandemic just made it much, much worse. So the ability to connect with people and their feelings and what they need is of vital importance at the core of any culture that you really want to foster to start to really.
I'm so glad you said that. It's just frozen just a little bit. Are you there?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we've got Bret back.
Okay, great. So basically, tops down sales targets coming from the top management down tend to create a lot more pressure. Why not turn it upside down and allow the person to set their own target based upon their own aspiration? And then you work with them. And my experience has been, Nant, when you do this, you actually flip the pressure upside down. and then the employee's more committed, more engaged. Their
And then
feelings
it's on
are
the
taken
leader
in.
to provide the employee with what they need.
Exactly. You
I
provide
like
them
that
what they
so
need.
much.
What's the competitive landscape, for example? Here's a tool that you might use, a planning journal, what have you. You know, there could be a lot of.
So then we really are working as a team and working towards a
Then you're
common
working
goal,
as a team.
not as
Instead of just
yes.
giving you, Nat, this is your target, and you better hit this target. And if you don't, we're going to have a conversation about your performance.
And the only time you'll ever see me is on a 3-month review, or when I need to see you in my office. Other than that, you'll see me walking around the halls and you can say hello.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
But speaking of the pandemic, I know that it's brought a lot of understanding that we had to do what we had to do. But it has brought a lot of pressures financially with work. But it's also completely taken us away from our natural state of connecting. And as you said, you know, you're sitting in a box 24 hours a day, which is it's incredibly demoralizing for humans to feel like they're being punished for something that they haven't done. And I know a lot of people over here have felt like they were being put in the naughty corner. So how do we overcome all of the health challenges relating to work that have come about because of the pandemic? Where do we even start?
Yeah, and I think it is a complex issue, right? Because you've got governments, and you've got and then not all of government. Some of the government work has been very relevant and very good. Singapore, I'll cite as a great example in that as well. The U.S. government is probably done the poorest job of all in the entire equation. So
I'll put up Australia as a equal.
Yeah, well, I'm fairly familiar with Australia. Let me just say, parts of the United States probably far worse than Australia. But anyway,
really? Wow.
but I think you and probably the listeners are get the idea. But so then you look and then there's other countries in Asia that have done a good job because they have been through, and Singapore included, they've been through SARS. Okay, so many people listening to this might faintly remember SARS when it hit Asia in the 2000s, right?
Yes.
That it was effectively dealt with. It took a little while, but it was effectively dealt with because people understood the science behind it. They understood the benefits of wearing a mask, right? And they were able to basically squash SARS through that method. And it was purely science-based, unlike many parts of the world that have kind of said, well, you should lock down, but if the politicians are having an event, then it's probably okay. The virus will give them a break. There was none of that going on during SARS, right? SARS is a great example of government end to end operating on the science from day one. Because I'll tell you, and I brought up I'm not going to make a comment about Australia just because I haven't been there during the pandemic, but I'll give an example in the U.S. When it first happened, you don't need to wear a mask. That was the official from the health agency, the CDC. You don't need to wear a mask, right? And I'm not being critical of it, but looking and there were other parts of the world
they have been very inconsistent though.
They have been very inconsistent,
from day to day.
and that's my point. Exactly, that's my point. So your question, back to your question, how do we deal with these kinds of things and all these
also
variables?
The working from home now, which has been so great for so many people. But how do we keep the culture when half the people are in for 50% of the time, half the people are in the other 50%? What do we do about this?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ideas, okay, and these are very specific. Number one is that I feel people, by the way, are feeling that the same technology you and I are using right now, Zoom, right, which is now worldwide.
Yes.
People are feeling the technology is being used to inspect, are they working or not, right? And some people have even used the word spy, and not spy by saying, well, okay, what's going on in the room that you're sitting in, but how many hours a day are you really working, right? So there's a lot of meetings, et cetera. So number one, what I would do if I were to take over Nant, this is any company,
Yes.
okay? Any company. And I've got a reputation as a leader, left a legacy that he will do things that are a little bit off the wall, but it
Yes.
will sure disrupt the status quo. So number one, if I were to be the CEO of a company, what I would do, regardless of whatever company, business that company's in, the number of Zoom meetings, because we're now 2 years into this, would be reduced by 75%.
Wow.
It's a unilateral decision, 75%. And the leadership around me would need to figure out how to get the job done with 75% fewer. And this would be mandatory in a story. Okay. Number two, what I would do is I would take the performance measurement systems and completely turn them upside down. So we talked about targets versus goals a while ago. But what I would do is I would immediately disband all activity tracking that companies are doing. So if you're in sales and there's a high probability that one of your measurements is how many meetings are you having with clients.
Yes.
And I made a career in wealth management, retail banking, and that was a critical indicator of what we use to track activity, because the more meetings that you have, then the more likely it is you'll get sales, right? Things have changed now.
The old numbers game approach.
The old numbers game, calls, contacts, appointments equals sales. It's true. That formula hasn't changed, right? But we need to give humans, so all of a sudden, back to your question, the oxygen has been taken from many of these people where now they're not out in the world. So half of them are in, half of them are out. And so they don't have enough. So we need to let them breathe, right? We need to give them some oxygen. So what I would do is I would change all performance systems to outcomes only, zero activities. Again, unilateral across the board. Now, somebody might be working
great,
in that.
because people
it would be
work
great,
so
right?
Differently.
Exactly, because the landscape has changed. We need to change the traditional landscape. And back to culture, that's what good cultures do. They have an ability to add in versatility. I liken, I take a smartphone, right? And it's a beautiful piece of hardware. Everybody loves it when they get it out of the box, right? But if you don't have a SIM card in it, you don't have a chip in it, it's not going to work, Nat.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter. And that chip or the programming inside of that, the software versus the hardware, that's the leadership culture component of this. And that's what's missing.
That's a great analogy.
And is the root cause of these issues that we're talking about. And some companies have it right. Okay. Some companies have figured out how to thrive in different types of economies, right? Look at Amazon. Amazon, sure, they're doing better now in the pandemic era than they ever did before, but they were doing pretty darn good before the pandemic, right? So they're pretty resilient they had the foresight to do it. Apple's another one, right? Again, we're talking about some of the world's most valuable companies, Tesla and eye to the future. So how do you actually look at the future landscape? To use a sport analogy, I know you love sport. I do too.
Yes.
Use a hockey analogy, skate where the puck is going, not where it is. There's still so many companies, Nat, that are skating where the puck is. And for so long, didn't that work well? It really did. And profits were at a record high, but at what cost? Because now you need to skate where the puck is going, because what the pandemic did, it accelerated digitization. I don't know, 5-10 years, would you say?
Yes,
I don't know. It doesn't matter, but it did
Absolutely.
accelerate it, right? So, and it wasn't just for the Apples of the world and, different things like that. So it's like, having the foresight, skating where the puck is going. So somebody today on LinkedIn posted a great framework. I loved it. It was talking about how to, if you're an entrepreneur, how to set up your business from a mindset perspective. And they said, here are my 7 pillars. And I thought they were great. But the question was to the readers, would you add anything? And I said, I'd take your 7 pillars. I think they're great, but I would put a lens on all 7 on what's it going to look like 3 to 5 years from now. And that's where people got caught cold-footed when the pandemic hit, because now they're caught off guard, and that therefore you have this big disconnect and with how employees feel versus what, and leadership in many cases doesn't even know what the needs of employees are, right? What the needs of men are, with this as well.
Normally a leader, a manager will tell you what your needs are. So it hasn't been great.
Now it's flipped around quite a bit, and people are viewing the Great Resignation. People are viewing it less risky now to quit than to continue to put up with it, and that's creating a whole bunch of other pressures on. We're talking about men today, on men, where now maybe they're at home and they're not employed, and they've been employed their entire life, right? So what kind of pressure do you think that is with the family, right? It's
huge.
So these things are, they're all somewhat. I think we dropped again, man. Okay, yeah. And so what happened is that a lot of these leaders are not relevant in today's world because they're managers. They're that piece of hardware that I referenced earlier. So they haven't had the programming. Now, can they get therapy? They can, okay? They need to be willing to do that. And there needs to be some catalyst for making that change. But we basically, what I'm saying in a nutshell, Nant, is that people need to be reprogrammed to understand more of the soft side of humans instead of the harsh tactics of the past, if that makes sense.
I'm so glad you said that, because that leads straight actually into my next question, which is obviously men are at a higher level, more prevalent in the corporate community, just from how the world has been. And as you said, that's changing. But how do we help men? Because there's such a mask that gets put on at work, especially when you're a leader. They need to be very stoic and in charge. And how do we allow men to be leaders, but also, as you said, the soft skills? How do we manage to bring that into the soft skills into the workplace so that men in the workplace can feel comfortable going to their leaders or going to other team members and saying, hey, I'm struggling, or my health isn't quite right? And a leader can also be seen for what he really is. Maybe he's jovial and no one knows that, because at work he puts on a big facade and is tough and stoic. So how do we bring people into the workplace? How do we let men do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it's going to come down to it's going to be difficult to do that, but it can be done. And I think we have to make it attractive for them. So one thing I believe will not change, just like summer never changes, right? So summer, guess what? Summer is you just finished your summer, and guess what? It'll be back. It'll be back next year. Right. Yeah. So some things in the topics that we're talking about will cycle back through, but you can't just wait for that to happen. So the point is, you have to be busy in the winter preparing for the summer, right? And you have to survive the winter, etc. So I think a big part of this will be that one of the universal truths is that the best people will always wind up at the best companies. Okay, so there will be more and more. So it's probably going to involve a hybrid type of situation where it'll be a combination. Some jobs are just better done human to human, face to face, right? Yes, and so the smart companies are going to figure this out, because I think one of the mistakes has been that the government policies have been, they've just been across the board. So they impact everybody. So if I'm in sales and need to be out there and I can't go out there, that's not very relevant, to me. I can't really I can't do that job on Zoom, right? So I've got a connection on LinkedIn. She lives in Georgia in the US, and she sells equipment, armor, to police. And it's important for her to go out into the field so
Absolutely.
she can explain the latest technology to the different police departments around her state and the surrounding states. And when she's locked down, she can't do that. You can't do that over Zoom because
Yeah.
you can't feel the armor, through the computer screen, right? So, and part of it will be that a lot of automation will take care of a lot of things. One thing the
Yes.
pandemic has taught us that automation can take care of a lot of the clerical things, which I would argue could actually help improve wages because people will I've always believed that people don't you don't get paid for your time,
Yeah.
because if you get paid for your time, why work? Because you could spend your time on the couch watching telly, right?
Yeah.
At home and get paid. Well, that's not, you don't really get paid for it. You get paid for the value that you can deliver to the marketplace. So I'm always encouraging people, Nat, especially right now, those that are unemployed, and there are a lot of men in this case, right? To skill up. Now is the time to skill up. And guess what? When I grew up, I'm 58 years old. So I grew up in the kind of my early years born in 64. So in the 70s, the one thing I had to have was something called Encyclopedia Britannica.
Oh, we love
And it
that.
was, yeah.
It
And
was
it
so
was,
good.
and there's probably a lot of people that are going to be listening to this saying, what is he talking about? Well, you can Google it now, but we didn't have Google back then.
They
And
were
these were
awesome.
something like 36 books, and our family couldn't afford to buy all of them at the same time.
Yeah.
So what I'd want for Christmas, just give me 3 of them, and then I get 3 the next year. And this is how we built our library. Well, now we've got a library at our fingertips, right?
Absolutely.
So the question is, how resourceful are people being right now to learn and skill up into something where the puck is going, where that hockey puck is going into the future? And the ones that are resourceful will be able to do it, and the ones that aren't are going to get left behind and probably continue to be complaining, or in the worst case, the unfortunate case of, it could be part of the suicide that you mentioned, right? So we want to make sure that we get people to understand anybody can grow. It's the nature of a human being, right? Men, women, anybody can grow. We're the only
Yes.
species that can we're built to thrive, not just survive. We're not like that.
That's
We're
my
not like
saying. Love it.
right? We're not the squirrel that is the number one mission is to survive, right? And so, sure, we can survive, but what kind of a life is that if we just survive, right? We need to take some risk
Absolutely.
and get out there. And now, again, at our fingertips, we don't have to rely on Encyclopedia Britannica. We've got LinkedIn's a great tool. It's not the only tool out there, but Google is an equally great tool, right? It's probably
You
even more
can learn
powerful.
anything now, can't you, online?
And Zoom, right? I mean, you and I've learned a lot from each other both ways in
Yes.
the short time that we've known each other, right? We've accelerated our relationship, I think, by a number of years in
Absolutely.
the course of a month, right?
Yes.
Because we're both resourceful people, and we actually spend dedicated time on particular subjects of common interest, right? So I think that it's really important to widen the net and tap into what we have at our fingertips. And that's not scrolling on Facebook, right? And it's not just
Yes.
texting somebody, right? It's really I mean, if you want to take a break, when I take a break, I like to text people, but I
Absolutely.
don't use that as my primary obsession, because I'm
Absolutely.
not going to learn by living inside the text machine, right?
Yes.
So yeah.
That's a great point. Now,
Yeah.
what do you think we can do for men? What do they need that we just aren't giving them?
I think a big part of it is, and again, if anybody that knows me over the years and also knows me today, I'm the same that I was 20 years ago, with my feelings about equality for women,
Yes.
etc. So all of that said, back to the point on men, I think a lot of the focus on that has had a detrimental impact to some men,
I
not
agree.
all men.
I agree.
And a lot of it has been just because it's been now, personally, it has not impacted me. And I've actually been part of this change with women. And I think I have an advantage And for those men that are out there supporting women are probably at an advantage because you're actually a man helping to, involve some of the change and be a catalyst for the change. But a lot of men, and I'll give you an example, pay equity is an example, right? So we all know that there are severe inequalities in pay, right? And then we have corporations. The dinosaur mindset says pay for performance, and I actually believe that. I believe that still, you should pay for performance. I don't think there's any women out there asking to pay me when I don't perform, and if they are, they shouldn't be paid, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But there's a cost to everything, right? So I think as these pay equity initiatives come into play, and assuming profits are somewhat constant, there is a bit of a reallocation on the numbers to bring this equality. Is that right? Is it not? That's where the debate always comes in. But you asked a question about how are men impacted? Well, that's one thing. They are impacted on pay a bit by this, not dramatically. And should they be? I don't know. Should we bring women up? We certainly should. So that's my belief. So what can we do about about a particular case like that?
You're absolutely right. I do think that the movement to be more inclusive, even the men that really, really want that and they're all for it, they're still being impacted, especially I'm seeing emotionally, really not knowing where they fit in anymore. What's their role now? And, a lot of men are feeling lost.
They're feeling lost. And I think it's important that we change that. And so the question becomes, okay, so what, Bret Nant? So what are you going to do about it? Well, I think one thing you can do about it, we can continue to progress with the equality initiative, but it doesn't mean that you abandon half of the workforce, right? Which are the men, let's say, right? Some stats, depending on the country you're in, are roughly 50-50, right? In the workforce. And the leadership, the higher you go up in leadership, the more male dominated it is. And that's going to be changing over time. Now, so the question becomes, men should continue to be rewarded for performance, right? They shouldn't be just given a pacifier on compensation.
Absolutely.
And women should be given an opportunity to apply for job openings as they happen, right? But so what do you do for the men? Don't abandon them as number one. So you don't, and that's what this movement has done in many cases, is completely abandon them. And because you were born a male, you're going to be over here in the corner while we pay more attention over here. I think that type of mindset needs to stop. I think a lot of that is corporate media driven and does not reflect the feelings of the majority of the population, female included. Okay. Now, unfortunately, corporate media has a loud voice. So what people tune into, what they read, and all of this stuff, they're led to believe, in my opinion, that the majority feels that men need to be put in the corner.
I'm so glad you said that, because in this instance, we don't need to take from one side to give to the other. I feel that we have gone a little bit too far in the taking direction.
We could grow the pie. The power. I always say, people, and this applies to race as well.
Yes.
It applies to ethnicity. That the more diverse the mindset is, the more that the bigger the pie will get. Using your analogy, right? The higher the profits are, because you get more creative ideas, you get faster decisions. You're more likely to be told the truth versus something being politicized with you as well. So I think what men are part of the solution here, though, and I think what men should do is embrace and lead from the front the whole women equality matter, and racial equality and ethnicity equality. Because for the men that take a leadership in correcting some of the imbalances, right, in the world. Every man that I know, myself, I can speak for myself, is rewarded handsomely for doing that. I was starting to say before we got cut a minute ago that in Japan, we had 2 female branch managers when I came in. And after 2 weeks, I went around the country and met a lot of people. And I had a staff meeting and I said, why are there only 2 women branch managers? And I was looked at like, well, don't touch this model. Now, Japan is one of the societies that is incredibly favoring males, right? But fast forward 2 years and we had converted that to 50% female.
Wow.
In Japan, you can't fire people unless they do
Right.
something wrongdoing, and there's no age discrimination laws even to this day in Japan. So if you can do something like this, like what I'm talking about, in a country as complex as Japan,
Yes.
and make it happen through demotion on performance, that's how I got it done. And then we were able to correct that. There needs to be men that can say, people should not, men included, women, you should not be, you should not expect to receive entitlement. Okay, if you're working for a for-profit, you need to perform, right?
Yes.
So skill up, and then men need to make sure that it is a performance-based system applied equally to men and women. And I'd like to see more men step up and be a voice for women because they'll benefit from that. It's like giving and kindness. Nant, you're an incredibly kind person. One of the things that attracted me most to you when we first met, and you're kind to people. And guess what? That kindness is returned to you in multiples, right? It's the same thing with this. If men would step up and support the women, I think that all the women that I've been around, they are the biggest supporters of men that I know, right? So a lot of this is kind of the giving model, and it's not even taking a risk. Just do it, right? I have worked for some incredible male and female bosses, and I tell you, a female boss I work for, she's amazing. She is absolutely amazing, and she thinks I'm amazing, right? So there's no issue with that. We don't see a difference in gender. When I'm talking to you right now, I'm conscious that there's a gender, right? But I really don't see, I see you as another kind human. I don't just see you, as I'm aware you're female, right? But I'm seeing you as another kind-hearted person. And we're talking about a really sensitive subject here on this podcast, right? And we can have a frank conversation about what it will take. So I believe.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the media before, and I really think that, you had a post the other day, and I commented on it saying, what we see in others is in ourselves, and what we perceive in the world, what we see in the world is how we perceive the world. And you're speaking about kindness. I think I completely agree that the far majority of people want to see each other succeed. Whether they're, purple, white, or no one cares. Everyone just wants to help each other. I really believe that. And it's very challenging to have that kind of perception if we're focused on the media and what we're being fed. So we have to be very mindful of what we're actually taking notice of and what we're creating in our minds.
Right. Yeah.
I'm very aware of your time. So one more question. Now, I don't know what it was like in America, but in the 80s in Australia, it was very, business was done in the pub at lunch, on the golf course. And there was fringe benefits to that. So everyone was going to lunch and doing business and putting it in as a tax write-off, and the government stopped that in the 80s, at the end of the 80s, I think. So as much as I appreciate and I'm very thankful for tech, because it allows us to do this, and I've got to meet you, it has really impacted our life in a lot of negative ways also. And I'm going to generalize here. I hate generalizations, but
Sure.
Men are particularly good at avoiding their emotions by overworking. They're very good at it. And with tech has come the 24-hour workday, and everyone's, I'm just doing an email at 10 at night. I'm just doing an email before I go to bed. So what would you say to men who, two questions really, when did it stop? When did we stop, from the 80s kind of attitude, which obviously was too far one way? When did we move into long lunches to no lunches and finishing at 5, you're working till 10? Well, when did that change? And then how do we help men get off their devices and connect again with their family or with themselves or just with each other after work hours, instead of focusing on overworking? Because that's still seen, that hustle culture is still seen as a trophy.
It is, and a lot of it, and I think and it's also different across the generations, right? So, you take the baby boomers and Gen X's, so I'm, Gen X, right? And then you take the Y and the Z, very, very different type of approach, right? And ironically, a lot of people aren't aware of this, but the Gen Z is a lot more like the Gen X's than a lot of people realize. And they're in the fact that they're competitive, they're less collaborative. They will collaborate, but they're less collaborative than the millennials of that as well. And so back to your question, I think, when did it change? So I think you asked two questions there. When did it change? Okay. I don't think it was one event that changed, but I have a view that it started, that whole model started to get shaken up when 9/11 happened.
Right.
I was in Japan at the time. And if you look at that event and then what started to change around the world when that happened, economically speaking, because economics drives most of what
Absolutely
you and I are talking about now, right? We're talking about business. So that started to drive a lot of change, because in the 80s, we were dealing, inflation was sky high. Interest rates are above 20% in the US at the prime rate.
So
18, things are just really booming along, right? And when 9/11 happened, a lot of the progress that was made in the developed countries really got shaken up quite a bit from that event. Then if you fast forward, okay, that was 2001. Then you fast forward to 2008-ish, when the GFC hit. Then it really came to roost, because people's homes were impacted, right? Foreclosures, all of this stuff as well. And it became, so the focus started to really change with the severe financial strains, and the old-fashioned work ethic was starting to get redefined, in my opinion, right? And so then you get through the recovery of the GFC, you get more government regulation everywhere, which means that the cost pressures of companies, the pressure to reduce costs goes up exponentially. I'm from banking, so the cost of compliance with the new government regulation around the world has done that to profit margins, just squeeze profit margins, which led companies to one choice, which is to cut costs. So that cost cutting, the first thing to go isn't the marketing budget, it's the fringe benefits and a lot of the things that you're talking about. So, and then you've got the workforce, which was used to the 80s type of approach that you talked about. All of a sudden, it's like, I can't do that anymore. So what's going on? And then you have a pandemic that's hit, where people can no longer travel. I mean, I spent the majority of my career on airplanes and hotels. Nat, that was, if I needed to be in Sydney, my last job, based in Singapore and either Sydney or Melbourne. So a lot of this, I think these big events, 9/11, GFC, these crises, the pandemic crisis, I think has gradually changed it over time. That's why it hasn't been a light switch, right? So I think in my opinion, that has changed, but the person hasn't necessarily
Yeah.
changed with it. And the corporations have changed because they've become much more cost driven. Okay, the traditional corporations, right? And then you've
Yes,
got, of course, the new ones, which don't have these issues, right? The Amazons, Teslas,
absolutely. Yeah.
Apples. They've been able to, their business models are quite different. So, I think what I'm saying here is that a lot of companies need to become more like the tech companies
Yes.
culturally and understand. Apple understands, for example, that you still need a store, right?
Yes.
You still need a retail store, but the ability to have a high quality product and have it easily accessible and serviced, reliable, and to keep up or keep ahead of technology,
Yes.
that hasn't changed since Steve Jobs days.
Yeah.
That part has not changed. But the retail store, they weren't around really when Steve Jobs was here. So I think that's a company that has evolved, and they're skating where the puck is going on this as well. Facebook, I haven't mentioned them. So all these companies are, and now you've got NFTs, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency. Yes. You've got all these things that are out there, and it doesn't mean that men need to chase after these industries, but it does mean that men had better avoid a Kodak moment, right? Okay. Where I think everybody knows the Kodak moment. Yes. So don't do what the Kodak board did and ignore that one person that says, we better skate here where the puck is going. And guess what? I got a product that can do it. Yeah. And then they just dismissed it. And then they're bankrupt, right? So don't make that mistake as an individual. That's my advice to men. Be on the cutting edge, okay? Promote women, okay? And you'll get promoted, okay? Be kind in how you do things. Be different in how you do things, and you'll have different outcomes than you are now. Absolutely. Because the world has changed. Maybe I'll finish the point, Nan, if I could. Bruce Lee, yes. There's one of my favorite quotes of all time, be like water, my friend. And what he meant by that is that you pour water into a teacup and it becomes the cup. You pour water into a bottle and it becomes a bottle, right? You pour water onto in the shower and it forms on your body, right? So be like water, be adaptable, be versatile. That's the number one piece of advice I would give men in this environment. And if you can be versatile like that, you don't compromise your values. Yes. You just be like water. You can still hold the same values that you did. You should be more conscious about some of the biases that you have, right? Because that's part of being flexible and being like water. It's reality. You have to understand the governments do have this authority, and they're going to use it in a way that may not always make you happy, but be adaptable to it and find a way to fit in and to lead in that new world. It's very different than the Encyclopedia Britannica days.
I love those days.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyone who knows me, I regularly say, bring back the 80s. Just
yes,
let me have the 80s back. I'll write on paper and the music and the clothes and
Michael Jackson.
Everything.
I was playing Michael Jackson this morning. That's exactly right. Bring him back.
They were the good old days.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time. You have left so many insights and so much wisdom for us. And if anyone out there, especially men, wanting to speak about leadership, are having troubles with leadership in their organization from wherever you are all over the world, please make sure you get in touch with Bret. He's on LinkedIn, or you can get in touch with me and I can put you in touch with Bret. But as you can see, he's got some amazing insights into what we need to be doing in organizations and how we need to be leading people and building the culture into the future. So please get in touch with him for anything regarding leadership, culture, networking. So important that some of what you've said is just so incredibly insightful, and I think it's so important that we take this on board and move with it. So thank you so much for your time. It's been an honor to have you on the Thrive for Men podcast, and I will look forward to seeing you soon.
It's my pleasure, Nat. Thank you so much again. It's my honor and privilege to be here. Thank you so much.